Welcome to Everything Under the Moon.
With Mel and Stell.
Hey,
Hey, Mel.
I didn't know how to start and I resorted to that. I'm ashamed. There's a place in my hometown called Rehmeyers Hollow. I used to go there as a kid. My family would stock trout with the IWLA, and we stocked the little creek there called Cadorus Creek. But there's about 800 acres of really thick forest called Rehmeyers Hollow, and there's a home there that belonged to Nelson D. Rehmeyer. And Mr. Rehmeyer was murdered in his home 100 years ago almost. And Stella and I visited Rehmeyers Hollow just recently. We went back to my hometown for a family event, and we had a really interesting experience there. And we're so excited to tell the story tonight.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It was a trip to go out there and see this hollow where this really gruesome murder took place. It was definitely otherworldly for sure. And this place is full of mystery and intrigue and creepy feelings and hauntings and weird experiences. It's just kind of become famous for a paranormal place. And that's because of who Nelson Rehmeyer himself was. You know, he was a witch, a powwower, a medicine man. And it ended up getting him killed. And it just, this case gained national attention because it was essentially a witch hunt.
Yeah, by other witches.
Yeah.
Which is super interesting. And men, you always, all the witch, most women killed in witchcraft, like witch hunts where they hung witches, were women.
Right.
So, yeah, it's just really interesting. And growing up, I'll kind of get into this, but growing up, I didn't even necessarily know that. I had no idea how or why he was murdered or what had happened. But the book Hex by Arthur Wells tells the story of this murder and the trial really wonderfully. And that's our main source for our episode or our show tonight. And I had to buy this from secondhand books because I think it's out of print. But it's a great little book and we really loved it. So that's our main source.
Now,
Okay.
how far away did you live from Rehmeyers Hollow when you were growing up?
I moved around a little bit growing up, so I think the closest I ever lived to it was probably 20 minutes away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but we always lived out in the country, so I mean, not that this place isn't in the country, but you would have to see a map for it to make sense because it's the East Coast Pennsylvania, so it's all
Sure.
like deer trail roads. They're all curvy.
I should say, as a crow flies, how far away is it?
That's what I mean. 20 minutes as the crow
Okay.
flies, probably driving because you can take main roads to get there, kind of. But so anyway, yeah, about 20 minutes. So it was someplace. I mean, I went there often. We stocked trout there every spring, and I had a friend actually who lived right up the street, like 5 minutes away, and we actually walked through Rehmeyers Hollow one time, one summer to go swimming in the creek. It was actually probably dangerously irresponsible because now, as an adult, I drove the road that I once walked on, and I was like, oh my God, kids should not be walking on this road. Oh my
Oh,
gosh.
yeah, one lane road with no shoulder.
Yeah, no shoulder, up a
Hairpin
blind
turns.
hill. Yeah.
It was really
So-
wild. I was so lucky to get a chance to go with you and get to see that because that place, like, you talked about how pumped you were to go there, and I was like, well, this is like kind of cool, but I mean, it's a hollow. Like,
Yeah.
I grew up in a hollow,
Yeah.
But this place, like, really, it's a vibe. It's a very creepy place, and as soon as you start making the turns toward that direction and the road is changed to like gravel, it's just, it feels like there is some sort of force field around that place, and like when you cross the barrier, the sounds of the outside world are muffled. Like the forest at that time was full of cicadas.
And
and we
it's
could hear them from really far off, but it sounded like they were super far away, like on the other side of the hill from where we were, when, they should have been everywhere. Like,
and it's dark.
yeah,
It's dark. It's so thickly shaded
it's always
that
like
it's
twilight.
yeah, it's exactly like that. Like it feels like a midnight sun type of vibe.
And we got really disoriented when we were out there, even though you're normally like really, really prone to knowing which direction you're going.
Yeah, we did get turned around at one point because it was really okay. So it was weird. Usually, like, so the legend I heard growing up was that if you went at night with your headlights off, then the street signs would change names or they would send you in circles.
Oh,
But this was
wow.
broad daylight.
Uh-huh.
We were there in broad daylight at like 10 a.m. on a Saturday morning.
Mm-hmm.
And we were trying to, it is basically a square, kind of,
Mm-hmm.
to get in and out. And they're doing some construction in the hollow. The county is, because it's a county park now,
Right.
Spring Valley Park. And so we couldn't drive through, but I thought we'd try to drive around to the other side because the other side has pavilions and some cool stuff.
Uh-huh.
But we just got turned around and it didn't make any sense because we were going south, and so we should have just been going,
It's like we drive past the road sign and see a turn, and then we keep going, and then we see the same turn again.
Yes, yeah.
It's like that.
And it's like, have I just not been home in 7 years and I don't know where I'm going? Or, but we were following GPS.
There's only
we
like
had
one road, though. Like it's.
Yeah. And we had a GPS. But I remember seeing the same guy. Like, remember we drove by the same guy in his RV, like on top of it. And I was like, okay, either that guy is a projection in the Matrix,
Right.
or we're just lost. But yeah, so Rehmeyer is murdered in 1928. And the community seems to quickly forget about the whole debacle. It's not clear when the rumors of ghosts and eerie specters began, but family members of mine have told stories that took place in the 70s and 80s, and I've been there, in the last 15 years. Somewhere along the years, our local collective mind had agreed that Rehmeyer's dark magic created a place where many dark forces might come into play. Like I said, the road signs change at night. Smoke rises from the chimney from Rehmeyers Cabin, which is still standing. His original cabin he built in the early 18th century, no, 20th century,
Yes.
is still there. And it's boarded up. I think his descendants still own the house, but it was locked while we were there. My dad said that sometimes you'll see a candle lit on the sill of the window inside, and we're actually going to have my dad on for a part 2 on this series, and he's going to tell us an amazing story about a black dog, a kind of demon-like black dog that chased after a group of snowmobilers, some family friends of ours from the county. So
And that was in Rehmeyers Hollow that
yep.
happened? Wow.
Yeah, they were snowmobiling through the hollow.
Oh,
in the
I
wintertime.
feel like seeing the black dog is like a
Yes.
whole subject in and of itself.
Oh,
like
we
it's
need
a
to do a
whole
black dog.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. It's like we could do like I would almost do that under a heading of like trucker urban legends.
Yes, that's a
because I
good
feel
one.
like that's where it comes from.
Yeah.
But
You know,
know-
it's interesting. I'm sorry, it's interesting you say that because this family is in the transportation business. They do own semis and buses, and like they do stuff like that. So I don't know.
yeah,
Just a
that's
thought.
where I always heard it from.
Yeah.
And what you were talking about when the legends and the haunted reputation may have been started, and I want to say that it started before Nelson Rehmeyer's murder. I think the fact that he was a witch doctor or a powwower that they call in that region, which we'll get into what that is. Like we'll talk a
Yeah.
little bit about like what those belief systems are around magic and healing and religion and how it all works together. But I think that he had a reputation of being, different. And all these legends about him, like doing these weird rituals in his basement. So I bet you from the time that he was living there, any kids that were around probably were afraid.
You
He
think
was a
so?
surly, well, he seemed like he was a really surly, unlikable man. And there's all these stories, lots of gossip about him doing rituals in his basement. And, there seemed to be this air of fear around him. Of course, that could just be all in the retelling.
Yeah, that's the vibe I get, maybe. I wonder if he was like a Ron Swanson type figure
I
who
could
was
see
very
that.
much like, get off my land, I want to be alone. I can totally see him being like a,
And you
in the
see,
community for sure. Yeah.
and how that could turn into like an ogre of the swamp
Yeah.
situation where
Yeah.
he
Oh, for
becomes
sure.
this feared evil witch bog creature that lives in the creepy hollow
Yeah.
that's never the sun never shines there.
Yeah.
So
And then this gruesome thing happens to him and it's just the perfect storm for an urban legend. So, um, you know, I'm gonna ask you a question.
yes,
Do you think we should get into the story of the people in the murder right away, or should I talk about Pennsylvania Dutch culture a little first?
I want to hear about the Pennsylvania Dutch culture first.
Okay, perfect. So, this is a story about Pennsylvania Dutch culture. The man who commits the murder, his name's John Bleimeyer. He was a neighbor to Rehmeyer, and of course their names sound similar, and no, that's not a coincidence. They're both Pennsylvania
Right.
Dutch descent. So, the ethnic group. This is an ethnic group in South Central Pennsylvania that I belong to as well. All of my family are Pennsylvania Dutch. And it's actually the word Pennsylvania Dutch doesn't mean Dutch, it means German. But in German, the way you say I'm German is Deutsch. So that's how it kind of got bastardized. Is that a bad word to use?
Nope.
Okay.
Or maybe
That's
co-opted.
good, right? Okay, we're taking it back. But that's how German immigrants would have described themselves. So that's what we call them. They came from the Palatinate mostly, which was a German, like a pre-Germany country in Germany in the 17th and 18th centuries. They were mostly Lutherans who were seeking religious asylum, and they found the fertile river valleys of southern Pennsylvania welcoming. William Penn tried to make Pennsylvania a place where people could practice freedom. So, like, the Quakers also came there. And this is the same group of people that the Amish and Mennonite communities kind of descend
Exactly. That's my main association when I hear Pennsylvania Dutch. It's the
Yes.
language that the Amish people speak.
from. Yes, they still speak it. And they are obviously a closed society. But at one point in Pennsylvania, until the 1850s, schools and businesses in this area spoke standard German regularly. I mean, people were fluent in it. And at home, they spoke Pennsylvania Dutch. And I actually read this really interesting paper as I was researching the Pennsylvania Dutch stuff from, what is the freaking college of the name? I feel like I should shout out the professor, but can't remember the name of the college. It'll come to me. Local place. Kutztown University. There we go. Gave all me all this information. I'm being crazy right now. I need to hold on and pause.
I love it.
Okay, good. He wrote a great paper about the culture and how it originated and how it mixed and melted together with other cultures in southern Pennsylvania. But essentially, Pennsylvania Dutch is probably a more direct language right from Germany than standard German is. Because we create standard
Really?
languages. Like a linguist said that we create standard languages from dialects. We take all the dialects and we create something that we can teach and that we can spread, and that's how standard languages become a thing. So it makes sense that they're teaching standard German but speaking Dutch, Pennsylvania Dutch. So I just thought that's really cool, and the language is really close to Yiddish.
That's interesting.
Yeah, isn't that cool? Like a linguistic cousin. I think I don't speak this language obviously, and I think to me it sounds a little bit like German with a lisp.
Yeah, I
you
think
know,
that
like
sounds
a mix,
fair. Yeah.
mix with English. I've never learned the language, but my great grandfather spoke the language, so I'm about 3 generations removed from it, which is really common. And we'll talk about that. I love the idea that cultures like slowly died out around this time in the 60s and 70s because we developed like TV communication, and that created a like global culture. and the global culture overtook the local cultures. Because you're only speaking a language when everyone around you speaks it, and it just became so unused. So anyway.
And yeah, that was a really fun aside. This is
Good.
like the kind of minutia that I love to hear about.
Good. I'm just glad.
So they came over to be able to practice religious freedom, and so basically, like, this is the area that we're talking about, like one of the very early settlers.
So this group of people, that actually had been long settled in this area.
Yeah.
John Beimeyer's like great-great-grandfather or something had bought the farm in the 1700s. They actually, it's cute, the book, not cute, but interesting. The book says like they couldn't even remember that guy's name, right? Like isn't that crazy? It's so far back, but this culture is really deep, and we can't hope to get into all of it in this hour, and I hope to God that I do not offend very proud Pennsylvania Dutch people, because I am one of you, but I'm woefully, uneducated. So, other than the food traditions.
Wait, what about the food traditions?
Well, it's just real good food. I mean,
what? Tell me about it.
Sauerkraut's Pennsylvania Dutch. Fosnots.
What's that?
It's like a donut. Trying to think of other food.
What's that
Chicken
food
pot
called?
pie. Oh, I gotta make you chicken pot pie, because it's not chicken pot pie. It's soup.
Oh,
It's soup with dumplings in it, but they call it chicken pot pie because it's chicken and
basically the same thing.
yeah. But it's so good, so good. Sorry. Okay. Red beet eggs. Oh, we need to go back to
You
Pennsylvania.
ever have pickled eggs?
That's what they are. They're pickled.
That's what you okay?
pickled
That I
with red beets too.
never heard it, but I love pickled eggs so much.
They're so good.
Yeah, they're delicious.
We
I
could
found
pickle
out
our
that
own eggs.
Oh yeah.
We'll pickle some of my hen's eggs this winter.
And we're back.
Thanks, Stell.
No problem, Mel.
So another, finishing up talking about Pennsylvania Dutch culture. You're all right, girl.
Thanks.
I don't think anyone's gonna. I'm playing the spring xylophone. Okay. Calm down, spring xylophone.
That's some sweet picking there, sister.
Oh, thanks. Sorry, I couldn't come up with an accent on the fly. So little girl came out.
But you tried, and that's all.
Thanks.
That's all that matters.
It is. Not really. E for effort. Okay. You need to know about powwow before we start. And Stell started talking about this already. And powwowing in Pennsylvania Dutch culture is essentially witchcraft. People perform small rituals meant to cure illness, remove curses or hexes, and it's called trying on patients, like as in trying to heal them. Although the idea of witchcraft and magic is generally pagan, these powwowers are Orthodox and usually Lutheran. So that's pretty interesting. And it might play into why it's so welcomed socially. I mean, these people are announcing their practice with shingles, actually, with their names painted on it, on their doors. So it's not something they hide. It's usually sympathetic magic, and if you don't know what sympathetic magic is, it's just something you use when you use representative objects to manifest your intentions. So I might, fill up a cup with water and say, as the cup fills, so does my cup of energy or something. I don't know. It's that kind of thing.
Yeah, with Bible verses, like relevant Bible verses and passages and signs of the cross. And of course, the most important requirement is faith.
Yeah.
On behalf of the healer and the sick.
Yeah, you have to believe that it will work. And it will work. And this is what I love about witchcraft, is that works. That works. Yeah. That's real. That's the placebo effect. And before we even had a name for it, that was real. And so if you truly believe that something is working, like a medication or a healing ritual, then it will probably work, regardless of whether it's a placebo effect or not. Our bodies are just crazy.
Yeah, I love that. And I know the tradition is passed down in generations, and your number in the lineage has a significance. Like if you're the seventh son of the seventh son.
Yeah, what's this? obsession with 7. I thought that was an interesting number.
That's another biblical tie-in.
Is it? Okay.
That's thought to be God's number. Like 777
Oh,
is God's number, and 666 is the number of the devil.
I never knew that.
Yeah, so that's where that comes
Interesting.
from.
Okay, well, that's pretty cool. Yeah, the magic is pretty interesting, and it involves a lot of like eggs and stones and wool yarns. You can tell that it's a practice developed by a rural type of people, and I love that.
Yeah,
It's very
and for these people, out in that area of Pennsylvania, hexery is a real thing. Hexes and curses and things like that are very real. And
yeah.
the powwower might be somebody that you go to either put a hex on somebody or to have a hex removed. So there's a lot of different ways of practicing, and they have a few different books that they like to use, and in a different hollow they might focus heavily on one of several books instead of another and practice in a slightly different way. But one of the first tests to see if you have like the touch or the shine or the power is to see if you can stop blood. So like that's the first test is, and no one can tell you how to do it. And in some circles, they believe that a man can never teach another man and a woman can never teach another woman, that it has to be like a cross-gender thing, that man teaches woman, woman teaches man. And
I love that.
in the first test, if they can't stop blood, then that means that they don't have the power. And that also became like an insult or like a burn
Yes.
against a powwower or a witch would be to say like, well, they can't even stop blood.
Yeah.
So,
And it's interesting that this was so common that was a thing. Like they had insults for each other. It's like this was so widespread. And I wanted to quote the book real quick because or Lewis, did I call him Arthur Wells?
I don't remember.
Hex by Arthur H. Lewis. I definitely called him Wells because I was
Okay.
thinking Orson Welles. This is quoting the New York Evening World in 1929. And the county coroner, this was, told to the county coroner. At least half of the 60,000 residents of the city of York believe in witchcraft. And as for the country's urban population of 90,000, they not only believe in witchcraft, but guide the minutest details of their lives by it. So I think that's really telling. Witchcraft isn't always necessarily hocus pocus. It's a lot of ritual and how you live your life, and that was obviously really strong in this culture.
Yeah, and I made a note. One example of like an illness that they might try for was called wildfire, or erypsilas is the best, like erypsilas. That's the best way I can think of to pronounce it. And I did look that up, and it is like a form of cellulitis that's caused by a bacterium. But it's usually on the outermost layer of skin, and it will create like a rather large welt
Okay.
on whatever area of the skin it is. And it usually accompanies with fever and other signs of infection.
Interesting.
So, yeah, it is a skin infection, but it's a skin infection that affects the outermost layer and is usually in patches. So, like, that was one of the things that was often tried for. And how you would do that is you would do the sign of the cross like 3 times over each area. And there was a chant. And so you do the sign of the cross 3 times while you do this chant. Wildfire and the dragon flew over a wagon. The wildfire abated and the dragon skated.
I love that. And it's
You can try that at home now.
it's so simple. That's what I love about it. It's just I don't know. It feels nostalgic to me. That's what I'm sitting here reminiscing about being. I don't know. It's because I'm feeling nostalgic for like my Nana's cooking. Because that's what Pennsylvania Dutch means to me. It's almost this disconnect between the hexery and the witchcraft and stuff and what I grew up with because it was so far removed, But I wanted to tell real quick the story of Mountain Mary.
Okay.
She was
Oh,
really
yeah.
cool, you remember, she was a witch in the Pennsylvania Dutch tradition, a Braucherei, they called them, which is German for fixer or something, I think. Braucherei. And This is actually a story that my dad had thought was about Rehmeyers Hollow. So this was in my childhood lore. I very much thought that owls were a part of the lore at Rehmeyers Hollow. And if you saw owls flying through the hollow, it was supposed to be Rehmeyer's ghost coming back to watch. Because he had heard the story that is actually Mountain Mary's, that an owl every morning was drinking milk out of her milk pail, and one morning she caught the owl and burned its feet over the coals in the fire in the hearth. And the next morning, her neighbor was badly burned on her feet and could not walk. And so
Oh,
that's how
yes, I
she
remember
discovered that
that.
her neighbor was a transforming witch and had been drinking her fresh milk. So my dad had always told me that that's what they did to Rehmeyer, was that they caught him while he was an owl and burned his feet. And now he flies. But it's interesting. Generational perspective. You can see how things get skewed that way. And no shade to my dad because he's awesome and it's a
But
great
like
story.
so like this in this little bit of the world, the belief in witchcraft is prevalent. It is the majority. It is a world of superstition. It is a world of hexery. It is a world of enchantments and incantations and curses. And this is the world in which John Beimeyer grew up.
So let's talk about John Beimeyer for a little bit. John Beimeyer grew up near Rehmeyer on a family farm, and he was a generational powwower, like you said. His great-grandfather had settled the land, and Beimeyer was born with a gift, as his father and grandfather were. And I believe that, so yeah, okay, you already said that. He's the son of a seventh son of a seventh son.
Right.
And that is cool. Robert Todd, like Robert Smith Todd, Mary Lincoln's father, he was a seventh son. I don't know. I always think of that. I'm like, did he have powers, incantations?
No doubt.
Was he seeing emanations?
It's pretty much guaranteed that he did by our flawless logic.
I mean, obviously. All right. And it wasn't so let's talk a little bit about Bleimeyer. They detail him a lot, obviously, because he's the man who commits the murder and has the intent to murder Rehmeyer. And he actually worked for Rehmeyer as a child. He picked some potatoes for him, but that was their real only connection. This was not a close family connection with the man. And somewhere around 19, Bleimeyer's life started to take a turn for the worse. His health just kind of went downhill. He started to become anxious and sickly. And
Can I say this too really quick?
sure, of course.
So like just physically, he was like very much an Ichabod Crane kind of character. Like just
I
so
don't know
that
who
while
that
we're
is.
so I'll explain too. So very much like I wanted to give a physical description for the listeners because there was actually one provided of like what he looked like when he
Yes.
was being sworn in the courtroom.
Yeah.
And it was said that he looked like a prehistoric bird.
A little malnourished, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. So like that was his kind of physical description. So unfortunately, he didn't have that going for him.
Yeah, whereas, Rehmeyer was, I'll quote the book again, he was a powerfully built man. He weighed more than 200 pounds and was well over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders. I mean, this was a tough man.
Sounds like a Paul Bunyan type.
He sounds kind of cute.
Yeah, really. But his
Not gonna
personality didn't seem to be so cute, according to the people that lived around. But there's two sides to every story. I can imagine what kind of neighborhood I could move to, and everybody would be like, I would be like that disliked
oh, that
figure,
jerk.
that jerk, or it'd be like, that liberal,
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah. I'm kind of into the gruff. I don't know. He seems like a Ron Swanson type.
Yeah.
So where was? Oh, we should talk a little bit about Bleimeyer's IQ because I don't know how
true,
accurate
okay.
IQs, if they mean anything today, or how accurate they are. But Lewis, he wrote this book in the 60s and he took a lot of stock in it. And they tested Bleimeyer's IQ and it was somewhere around 70, 80. I think 77 was the actual number. Now I really want to find it, but I know it's not doable.
Yeah, I was thinking that he was somewhere like in the Forrest Gump region. Like that would be
Yeah.
a really good way to think about it is like that's about the intelligence that we're dealing with here.
Yeah, they said, average slow, but maybe on the lower end of average slow, if that means anything.
Which we present this as like mitigating circumstances, to understand,
Oh
like,
yeah. Yeah, you shouldn't
everything
judge
surrounding
Bleimeyer by this, but you do need to understand how he's perceiving.
contextual.
Yes. Oh, I love it. Yeah, so Bleimeyer is also a powwower. He's not super successful. So Rehmeyer, there's actually a story of Rehmeyer curing John, as a boy, because he had anemia, the wasting away, which is actually malnutrition. And Rehmeyer told them to make him pee in a pot before sunrise, then boil an egg in his urine, bore 3 small holes in it with a needle, and carry it to an anthill made by big ants. John will be better as soon as the egg is et.
Yep.
So by spring the child had recovered. So
So they'd had like somewhat of a relationship, kind of all
I guess
throughout.
I forgot that.
All throughout his life.
Yeah, it's crazy how close they had to have been, and that he went to this level. So it was an uncommon belief that a powwower held the ability to hex other people. And a hex was kind of like a curse, but it generally affected all parts of your life. Your livestock goes sick, your wife burns the biscuits. I'm making stuff
It's
up.
like the
But
full
everything goes
Job
wrong.
treatment, like you lose
Yeah.
everything.
When it rains, it pours.
Yeah.
And Bleimeyer believed around 19 years old that he had been hexed by somebody. His wife left him after he accused her of hexing him. He thought that it was her.
She thought that he was gonna kill her.
Yeah.
Because like this had been going on for a few years at that time, and like he had been visiting like various powwowers. Which why he didn't go to Rehmeyer first about this? Like I wonder,
Yeah.
like I would think with their relationship and how they knew each other growing up, that he would think of him first. But he spends his whole life going to a bunch of different ones, and several of these powwowers tell Bleimeyer that the hex was that he does have a hex on him, indeed, that they can see it, and that it was somebody close to him. And
Yes.
then yet another one said like what the letter, like a letter from their name, or something. And then, he started to like kind of turn on his wife, and then she ended up leaving him because she literally thought that he was going to kill her to break the hex. Because actually, like this, for some reason, this murder became very famous, and maybe that's because Rehmeyer was a witch himself, and that adds intrigue. But like killing somebody because you believed that they had put a hex on you was not unheard of at that time. In fact, it seems like it had happened a lot.
Yeah, and
In
was
previous generations before this.
and might have been undocumented purposefully. Like
Could be.
purposefully strewn. They talk a little bit in here, I think too, about children's deaths.
Yeah.
And how there are children's deaths that people didn't seek out like actual medical help. They just went to powwowers and the kids died. And that's the theme a little bit of the story too, is they believe so hard in this powwow, and because the powwow requires your 100% belief, they don't seek any other help out, and they kind of get stuck in this loop of
It becomes like a faith healing, and like then, that becomes an issue because you have to wonder, like, of course, there's going to be plenty of hucksters like out there
and-
that are out to make like a fast dime. And I mean, it makes sense too because, out in rural areas are always, more poverty stricken, more economically depressed. And it makes sense, that it might behoove you to say, yeah, I'll put a hex on somebody for $2.
Yeah,
You
and
know?
that's what these people are doing. They're charging, a couple dollars here and there to fix people's illnesses, and it's usually not a one-stop thing. It's usually you have to come back 2 or 3 times to really fix your issue. And I don't believe that all of these people are tricksters and doing it to make money off of people, but Lewis talks clearly about a couple people who are doing it to scam money out of people, and whether they really believe it or not, they're not helping things.
Yeah, and many times they'll say, "Oh, you're going to need continued treatment. Like I'm going to have to." Like you could go see one of them, and they'd say you have a curse on you, and in order for you to heal it, you're going to have to come back and see me twice a week for 6 months. to do continuous work. And then, they would even say like they don't take money up front, but those people that get treatments like are compelled, to donate to them anyway.
Yeah, it's
so
like no,
that con can be drawn out for a long time. But John was, from the age 19, he felt like he was cursed, right?
Yeah,
And
he generally is kind of sick. He can't keep work, and he actually another powwower tells him that he needs to leave his home farm because he's hurting the people around him. So he moves. He moves to York in the city and lives there for basically the rest of his life. And I thought that was really sad. That was actually a really sad
yeah.
part of the book because I really think something that might have helped this man was the support of his family. I mean, his grandfather and father were still alive. Like, why is he not with them?
And how could further isolating yourself is what I'm trying. Further isolating yourself is not going to make you feel any less cursed.
Yeah, and I believe. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm just at the end of the day, like that seems like really bad advice. But he went on a maddening search and he was desperate. And I think he probably reeked of desperation as he was going from like powwower to powwower, trying to like get help.
Getting
and
recommendations.
And like there was even a time, right, when he felt like the curse was lifted for a little while.
And then it came back.
Yeah. And then, so
he supposedly the woman who told him who had cursed him was this powwower who actually had stopped her practice, and she was like a 90-year-old woman, and she told him that it was Rehmeyer. And it's interesting because the book doesn't ever give a reasoning, or Beimeyer himself never said a reason why he thought Rehmeyer might have hexed him, but he was absolutely sure that he had done it. And that speaks a little bit, I think, to his intelligence level and his problem solving and maybe analytical skills. But I think maybe what he might have thought was that someone had paid Rehmeyer to hex him. Because that's what they do, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I think that's a whole part of what you were
everybody
saying.
was paying everybody to hex everyone, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like what you were saying, like, that's why he went and killed him, because he couldn't just approach him because he knew Rehmeyer was gonna say, well, someone paid me to do this and I'm not gonna take it back.
Well, he didn't even bother to ask. And like, I just thought it was really strange. First of all, how could he go I have questions. How could Rehmeyer have a relationship with this kid? Like, as a child, see him growing up, live nearby, is a neighbor, does work for him, the neighbor kid. Mm-hmm. Like, how could he hex him? First of all, that's the first one, but let me ask the second one as well. Okay. I want them both together. And then, how could John not see it? And how would that not be one of the first top three people that you would think of?
And how would his allegedly very powerful father and grandfather not see it? Because that's what got me. Like, right away, because his father and grandfather are stricken by this too. Like, their farm is suffering. And they all try to figure it out, and they can't tell either. And I just don't know how much I don't believe that Rehmeyer had actually hexed him. That's just what I believe. But I do think Rehmeyer probably hexed people. Mm-hmm. Other people. I think that he had mental illness. And there is a part in the book where he talks to a psychologist who had briefly talked to Beimeyer about his hex. Beimeyer is seeking any kind of help he can, and he actually does go see a real doctor because they find him crazy at one point, right? Doesn't he?
Yeah, there was, he got like, he was tested or evaluated like 3 times or something, and it was something like he passed one, failed one, passed one, or something.
Forget what he did though. Did he beat someone up or steal something? He did something, and
after he was arrested, or what do you mean?
No,
that
like
he'd previously been in trouble with the law,
and he had gone. They actually put him in an insane asylum, and he just walked out and was an escapee.
Oh yeah, I remember. And like because of their like really shoddy record keeping.
Yep.
They didn't even no one ever even went looking for him or anything, or even realized he was really gone.
Yeah, and as long as he didn't get in trouble, there was no reason to track him down, I guess. So
yeah.
Except for this. Somebody tried to murder someone.
Yeah, except then, I mean, what a horror movie.
So, John searches for Rehmeyer for years. And in his search, he actually meets a young man named John Curry. I'm going to call him Curry so that we can keep the Johns separate. And he's a very young man. He's 14 when he meets Beimeyer. And I think that Bleimeyer's renting a room in a house next door to where Curry lives. And he has kind of a rough home life. His mother is working constantly, and his stepfather is an alcoholic and very abusive. And so Curry kind of finds a lot of friendship in Beimeyer, who also, didn't have a lot of friends. So
The story was really sad.
it was.
He was someone where, like, I think they should have looked at the adults in that situation and said, all of you all are responsible for telling, like, this kid what to do. And, like, we'll get a little more into it when we actually go through the murder, like, once we're done introducing the cast. But, and just to be clear, when I've been saying John, it's because Beimeyer and Rehmeyer is, like, she's saying Beimeyer, I'm saying John, because the names are too similar to me for me to keep them. So I want you guys to know, just when you hear Beimeyer, you hear her saying Beimeyer, me saying John, the same person.
Let's
and then
just...
Curry is the 14-year-old boy.
Okay, let's sum one more time. So Nelson Rehmeyer, he is murdered. John Beimeyer, he's the murderer, man who thinks he's hexed. And John Curry is his friend. Yeah, good call. I should use John.
I have an issue with calling him a friend when he's 14.
You don't think a 14
and John Beimeyer's an adult?
You don't think so?
I mean, in a normal situation, sure, that would be absolutely fine. But then in a context of a murder, I feel like it's almost a grooming situation or something, like a violent grooming.
The only reason I don't look at it negatively, I guess, is because they were friends for years before they came to think about murdering him. Okay. I don't. That's my only...
What's their age difference?
You're right. I'm not entirely sure. I know it's at least 10 years, 12.
I feel like out of everybody, John Curry got the worst deal. And it's really, really sad. And I wonder how he would be treated differently today, or if he would be treated differently, or like how things in general would have played out today, because I'm getting a little ahead of myself. But all of those trials were kind of a trial by media and sort of a travesty and a speedy...
They were just...
it was a shit show.
And I believe Curry... Well, we'll talk about this at the end. We'll leave it for the end.
Yeah, I think we should talk about, like, the night of the murder.
Well, let's talk about the last guy, and then I'll get into the story of it. So, the last guy is Milton J. Hess, and he is a neighbor of Rehmeyer and Bleimeyers as well. And the Hesses also believe that they have been hexed. So their farm isn't producing, they can't find work. Originally intending to take a lock of Rehmeyer's hair or a copy of The Long Lost Friend, which was the Witchcraft Bible of a powwower. Beimeyer had been to the famous witch a few counties over, like I said, who told him that this is how he would break the hex. He would either take a lock of his hair and bury it 6 to 8 feet underground, or burn a copy of his book. They never really intended to murder Beimeyer. That's not what they told him to do. That's not what other powwowers wanted him to do. And they brought lengths of rope with them to the scene to tie him up so that they could cut his hair. When they arrived at Rehmeyer's home, after being dropped off that night in the dark, he wasn't home, and they marched up the hill to his wife's farm where she lived, and asked her where he was, and she said something about someone who he was casually seeing in the night, and that he might be home by this time. So they exasperatingly trudged back down into the dark hollow to Rehmeyers Cabin, and when they arrive, there's only one candle lit upstairs. They knock and knock and knock, and finally the old man opens the door. And like we said, he's a hulking figure, and he's a little intimidating, but he invited them into the parlor right away because, like we said, he knows these men, except for John Curry. He had known Milton and John.
Yeah, like ever since they were little boys.
Yeah.
Back when they were digging potatoes.
It's so sad. Eventually, after just some small talk, Rehmeyer goes to bed and offered to, he said, you can sleep on the floor and go to bed, or, have a light if you want, but I'm going to sleep. And they started to search the house for the long lost friend, and they couldn't find it. So Beimeyer's getting anxious. 30 years of misery and bad luck is going to come to an end soon.
Wait a second, though. One thing about when they were looking for the book, I think that someone had, like, several people had suggested, like, well, clearly it's in his basement.
Yeah.
It's in the basement. But for some reason, they don't go down there and look for it. And didn't you think that was so weird?
That made me so exasperated. Like, why did you not? I vaguely remember thinking, like, oh, it might have been locked, or because there's, like, a cellar door, too, from the outside. But that was also locked. I don't know if they said that the inside one was locked, though. But, like, he sees it.
I wonder if that
Beimeyer
was...
says he sees it on the floor.
I wonder if that is one of the reasons that they question the motive later on, because they did, and we'll get to that. But, I wonder if, like, that's something that, if they're sitting down and having an investigation, they say, well, wait a second, if you knew it was in the basement, or, whatever.
Yeah.
Like, if it was here, why didn't you just do that?
I don't know if that just speaks to Beimeyer's, like, again, low intelligence, like, his problem-solving skills. Like, he probably just wanted to get to the source, maybe. Like, that's what I took from it, at least, was that he was, in his excitement, just gotta get to the source of this freaking hex. I gotta stop it right now. And this guy's right here. But, yeah, that was exasperating.
So they look for it. They can't find it. They realize they're going to have to resort to the lock of hair.
So they awake Rehmeyer from his sleep and demand the book. And that's what they called it, the book. And Rehmeyer kind of knowingly questioned them, like, what book are you talking about? I don't understand, wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Like, and no, I don't know what you pulled me over for.
Yeah, except what was I speeding, sir? Rehmeyer kind of knowingly, he's like, oh, fine, take it. And he takes his pocketbook out of his back pocket and throws it at the men. And, Beimeyer's like, that's not what I'm talking about, bitch. Not really. He's like, you know what I'm talking about, and give it to me. And, Rehmeyer didn't give in, and so Beimeyer attacked him. And they, from what the men told the police officers who were taking their confessions, they think that they basically fought and grappled with him on the floor for an hour.
An hour, yeah.
In a fight to the death on the floor of the parlor.
It took 3 men an hour to kill him.
Yeah. Oh, that's terrifying. I mean, that's like the brutality, like, as people who don't face violence. Like, that's the brutality I cannot imagine.
In the end, at some point, John Curry picks up a large object and bashes him over the head with it.
Yeah, at one point they get his hands tied and he's on the ground, and Rehmeyer is I think he's trying to get a lock of his hair, and they're just not succeeding, and so Curry picks up a block of wood, like a big chunk of wood off the fire, and hits him on the head with it a couple times, and he just starts bleeding profusely from the head, and they just know that he's dead. And Beimeyer stood up over Rehmeyer's cold body and exclaimed, "Thank God the witch is dead." So, it makes you think that maybe he did go there with the intention of killing him, although he wasn't the one who did it. I don't know. It's a little scary. I wonder if... this might be a little
I think
offbeat,
then, at the end of it, pretty much... Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I wonder if John Curry was having some trauma. If he's experiencing... He's got an abusive stepfather. I wonder if that was a traumatic situation for him, and that his panic response was to kill
And
this
aren't the
man.
other 2 men, like, nearly twice his age?
Yeah. Yeah, Curry is 14. Rehmeyer is in his 50s or 60s.
Okay, so even more so, yeah.
Yeah. And I think Beimeyer and Milton are both in their 30s, 40s.
Yeah, I just don't think that kid should have been tangled up in any of this.
It's really sad. And I think his mother says something to that effect. She says something.
I mean, if that 14-year-old, nowadays, if that 14-year-old did anything else, it would be the parents.
Yeah, or he would get off, with some type of, like, rehabilitative program rather
Right.
than just jail for life. Or I don't think he actually went to jail for life. I'm pretty sure Curry is the
Yeah,
one who.
eventually some better form of justice was served, but it
Yeah.
never really sat well with me.
No, and I mean, I don't know. It's just sad that these men were scarred by it.
But basically, like right after that murder, they go home and
No,
then
they raid the house.
oh, okay.
They raid the house, like they overturn the furniture, they pull up floorboards.
That's
Still no word on whether they tried to get in the floor or in the basement.
Yeah.
But they don't, they can't find it. They can't find the book. And so they take, we're here. So they take some of his money, and he had a whole $1 and something in change.
Yeah, it was like almost $2.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like, and this is the 1920s. Hold on, I need to do this now.
And like they were kind of celebrating. There was like an air of celebration too. So it was almost like the winter spoils. They were like,
Yeah.
we killed the witch and we're going to take his stuff and he ruined my life anyway. So fuck this guy.
Okay, so $1 is worth $13.46 today, so they stole about $30. It'd be a murder for $30. And they did very much celebrate. They had this air of confidence. They knew that the hex was gone. Beimeyer even says that he can immediately feel, the relief and the stress away. And I don't know, it just sounds like a heaping mental illness to me.
Yeah.
It's just really sad. So they take the money and then they attempted to conceal the murder. They douse Rehmeyer's body and cover him in his mattress. They also douse that in kerosene. And the men try to burn the house down and they walk out. They leave the house about sunrise. And so they were there all night, basically fighting for their life and then searching the house. It was a braying mule the coming Monday morning that alerted Rehmeyer's neighbors 3 days later. Upon discovery, they found their friend soaked with kerosene and half charred. But despite the men's efforts, the house had not burned down. And that was the spooky part of the legend.
I mean,
growing
it still
up.
looks fine too. Like
Yeah.
you go by it this day, it looks absolutely fine.
It looks totally normal. Like it barely even burned the floor, I think. I mean, and that was a part of the lore that, like, his
so
power
strange.
and his magic had kept his body from burning so that the men might be served justice for their crime.
Wow.
And I'd believe it. I think you've got some power beyond the grave, but who knows? It was incredibly easy for the police to find their suspects. Rehmeyer's wife told them about their late-night inquiry and arrested all three of them in the coming days. Shockingly, all three men admitting to the crime. Beimeyer admitted that his motive for the murder was selfish. He wanted to rid himself of the hex that had plagued him for over 20 years, and he believed that Rehmeyer was the one who had done that to him. Beimeyer carried himself with confidence, and never once during his confession or the entire trial does he ever express like remorse or regret, or even looks like he feels bad about it. And that plays into also like his entire outlook on this, like he's like, it doesn't matter because I achieved my goal, because he has to believe, right, or it won't work.
Absolutely.
So what do you think? That's the gist of it.
That's
I mean,
what
they
happened.
confess right away, and I think it's really interesting. The house didn't burn down. I really want to know why the heck.
Then, I mean, yeah, the fact that the house didn't burn down, even though it was doused with kerosene and like there's a mattress there, and like that's like a 1920s ass mattress. It's probably got straw in it.
It's a wood cabin.
Yeah, I mean, it's tinder.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, and it's interesting that I just need a second. I just need a second. I can't get the image of someone beating someone with a block of wood over the head to death. That kind of hit me real hard at 10 at night. I don't know why. I mean, it's really sad. I mean, he had daughters. He had like 2 daughters. But,
yeah, and his ex-wife lived like.
well, she was still his wife.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
were
They never
married, but
separated, but they
separated.
lived separately. Yeah, but they were like pretty
And,
amicable.
They
though.
lived separately because
They were still friends though too, right? And they called on each other still.
Yeah, they were still friendly, and they like, he saw his kids and everything. And then she just lived right up the street, but she left because he was always practicing magic in his basement. She said that. She was like, he's always in that darned basement doing the hexing, whatever. The book he writes in phonetics, the Pennsylvania Dutch accent, and I can't mock it to save my life. And it was like, it's a shame that the judge and district attorney wouldn't allow witchcraft to be mentioned
Yeah,
in the
not at
courtroom.
all.
Because it was clearly the motive. They confessed to it. They mentioned it openly. Everyone knew. And
So, wait,
what was the reasoning essentially is that they don't want York County to look bad.
yeah. So each one of these men, like, it is debatable how fair their trial actually was. And that's for several different reasons. And one of them was that this was incredibly embarrassing for York. It was embarrassing for the home of the Gettysburg, or home of the Battle of Gettysburg. It was embarrassing for
For Pennsylvania
just
Dutch culture.
Pennsylvania
For
Dutch
these
culture
people,
in general.
because it's tourism also.
And it is the first thing that brought like all of these reporters came from all over the country to cover the trials. And so they really had a sense that the world was watching what they were doing. So they did not want to appear like backwards hicks, and they did not want to appear like fools and idiots who are superstitious. And for that reason, they wouldn't allow any mention of witchcraft during the trial whatsoever, like the judge wouldn't. But even more so than that, they expedited these trials to make sure that each one of these people was tried like back to back to back to back within days of the crime.
Yeah.
So, normally these days, like something like that for each of them, this whole process could go on for 5 years or more.
Yeah, I mean, it's years until you get to an actual trial.
So, but I mean, back then they got it done in a matter of days. And I think it was, like they started a trial like one day and then it was done the next day by 5 p.m. The defense had rested.
Yeah.
And it went like that for every single one of them. And it makes sense too because the judge was censoring all these mentions, any kind of mentions of witchcraft or hexery, which clearly would be at the detriment, the detriment of the defense.
So the prosecution is basically trying to like work his way around this rule in the questioning, and he keeps like, I thought he had a bunch of really brilliant ways to do that. He like would bring up hexery in another person's testimony, unrelated, like seemingly unrelated, and then suddenly they'd be like, oh yeah, and you knew that John or that Rehmeyer practiced this, right? Like it was just like a smack. Like the jury got like one little glimpse of the witchcraft side of the angle, but then the defense would always be like, what do they say? What's the thing people scream?
Objection.
Objection. Objection. Yeah.
It was all like that. The trials, all three of those trials were a lot of objections sustained when it came to that mention. And of course, like from, so the theory of the district attorney's office was that it had been, the motive of the murder had been money, and that they went out there and brutally murdered him and killed him to steal his gold.
Yeah.
And then there's just not any evidence that he had anything really to leave anybody. Like, I think he left the house to his daughter. I mean, in his will, he only had he had very few earthly possessions.
It was just land.
But
really.
but that was their explanation. And when you're, and so the defense was relying on being able to explain how deeply ingrained like these sincerely held beliefs were about hexes and what you have to do about them. But the judge ruled like immediately early on in the case that that this case had nothing to do with witchcraft and hexery, and that he wouldn't be letting any superstitious nonsense like that essentially to be allowed in his courtroom, especially not with the world watching and the press there and all of Pennsylvania Dutch culture on trial essentially. And so they were all kind of railroaded, in my opinion.
I think too, there was this culture of if you called out another powwower in public in a negative way, they would hex you. That was a common belief, and so the judge thought that it might even be kind of counterintuitive to even bring it up and try, and because then you have to bring up the powwowers and ask them what they're doing, and it would create even more of a spectacle. And he thought that it wouldn't be a successful trial because people's own in the area, there was such a prominent belief, and that would get into their system. And it's crazy that they didn't think of moving the trial. Why not just move it? Move the trial somewhere else. Like,
Yeah. There wasn't really a satisfying explanation for that either.
so what are our three theories that of why they killed Rehmeyer, essentially? Is that what I think this part one is mostly just about is murder, so.
Yeah, absolutely. So the three main things, so his motive was either greed, robbery gone wrong, or two, the story that the defense gives, which is that it's because of a hex that was placed on John. And then three, what was the third one? Wait,
I don't know, you came up with them.
money. It was, I think it was
The gold.
just two. No,
The gold.
It was either gold or witchcraft.
Okay, yeah. So there's the theory that Rehmeyer actually had secret gold hidden.
Yeah, exactly.
And that
that's
they
what
were
I
trying to
wonder.
go
Like,
figure out.
is there gold in Rehmeyers Hollow?
No. Well, I mean,
Well,
no. I mean,
okay.
I'm assuming, I don't know. Like, I'm assuming that if there was any gold, it would have been in his will and that they would have found it in the family, so.
Who knows?
But,
I'd sure like to check.
I think it's a little ridiculous to think that these men did anything for money. I mean, I think this was
it doesn't
very
make
clearly
sense.
entirely because they 100% believe that every pitfall, becoming their family was because of a hex. It's just,
And
it's so
unfortunately,
irrational.
with the world watching, York did not want to be seen as soft on murder and superstitious.
Yeah. So I believe Beimeyer had, what did he get? He got life in prison. Beimeyer got
Right.
life in prison. Curry also had many years in prison, but I don't think life.
He had life,
Oh,
but then later he had his sentence commuted, I believe, and he
Yeah.
ended up being able to go home after, was it 15 years maybe?
yeah, because he eventually had like a family and a wife, and
Yeah, so he did have, and like, that's really great. I'm glad that in the end, justice was a little bit more served because he did commit a murder and it is unconscionable,
Yeah.
conscionable, but he was a child
yeah,
with
And a very
adults who are much more,
traumatized.
with adults who were much more, a very traumatized child with two authority figures that they should be held responsible for him, I think. The court recognizes that that children are not responsible for a certain amount of what they do. Like that the people that are around them are an influence and are a factor.
Oh, I completely blame all of this on Bleimeyer. He told Curry, like, what his intention was. He told Curry that this would fix his problems. Like, Curry wanted to help his friend, and that's all he knew. Like, you have to imagine from, like, John's perspective, this probably isn't coming out very nuanced. It's probably just like, we do this and the problem is solved. There's no more than that. And there's probably definitely not forward thinking, like, or planning for the future.
Part of the fallout of this case is that the state they added more restrictions by way of saying by enforcing that powwowing is practicing medicine without a license.
Yeah.
So the problem was that there was one famous powwower that was kind of on the fringe of this whole story, and that he's sort of involved. He knows all the people and
Seen Rehmeyer.
and his
Or,
name's,
sorry.
yeah,
Bleimeyer.
his name's Cohen.
Yes.
So Cohen, he was a big time powwower practitioner who tried for people all the time, curing things and doing faith healing basically. They wanted to try him on that so many times, but nobody was willing to testify against him because they were afraid that they would be hexed.
Yeah, I can't
And I
believe I forgot.
believe someone I think the district attorney when the one that had been pushing to try to get Cohen brought up on charges, ended up after like the second trial. Is this ringing a bell at all?
Yeah.
Like there, a bullet ricocheted into the district attorney's office and missed him.
Yes. Yeah,
like
it went into his filing cabinet.
Yeah.
And everyone in the office was like, "Oh
It's
man,
because
you
he
really
was-
shouldn't mess with that doctor." And he was like, "A pshaw." Like
Yeah. So
Yeah.
like
Oh, I can't- it's
he
so
had several
crazy.
unfortunate things to happen to him like around that time, and I think that could almost be a topic in and of itself. But like there were people that believed that they saw evidence that he was hexed himself for even
Yeah, and-
speaking out against this stuff and prosecuting these people. And anyway,
And it's such an ingrained belief in the community. Like every single one of them is predisposed to believe that this is really going on, and it's almost like they're forming this mob mentality. And I wonder if there's even if I don't think there ever could have been a different outcome for this trial or situation, because I think it's also very much like my people to be like, we're not going to talk about that. Let's just focus on this over here. And we're going to keep that to ourselves. It's very much to keep those parts of your family or your culture that are like private to yourself. And especially when it's in another language. That's what it's about. So anyway, don't know where I was going with this.
yeah, I mean, I think that that was the trial, and then some interesting things that happened around it.
Yeah, and so next week we're going to talk about some more of the urban legends, and we're going to have my dad come on and tell an amazing ghost story, I guess a cryptid story about a black dog that was seen in Rehmeyers Hollow that's, I guess, still supposed to haunt the Hollow to this day.
We've got some really good stuff coming up.
Yeah, we've got another conspiracy shelf on cults in America.
Absolutely.
And then I'm working on a conspiracy shelf for a little farther away called Earth Magic, about ancient megalithic monuments, skinwalkers, Mothman. We went to Point Pleasant recently on our way to Pennsylvania. We stopped in West Virginia, and it was amazing. Oh my God, we have to tell everyone about Mothman's daddy.
Oh yeah, Mothman Daddy. Yeah. So this was on our way to go to visit Mel's family and to go check out Rehmeyers Hollow. We both decided to fulfill, like, I don't know if it was for you, but it's like a lifelong dream for me, like a long time thing. I've always wanted to go to Point Pleasant. Okay. Well, I've always been obsessed with the Mothman. So it was just awesome. We got to stop by on the trip, and when we were there, we met a guy named Mothman Daddy, and you take it from here.
We were like walking down the street. We're walking back to our rental car. We just had Mexican food, and this guy's just sitting on a bench drinking a coffee, like staring into an art gallery. And he's like, "Oh, where are you ladies from?" And we start talking. Everyone in Point Pleasant was very friendly, so that was really cool. Mm-hmm. Like literally strangers, everyone was talking to us. We start telling him that, we have a podcast and we're here for Mothman, and we went to the museum. And he pulls out a business card that says Mothman's Daddy.
Yeah.
He was legit Mothman's Daddy. Because when he says, when he's like, "Oh, I'm Mothman's Daddy," we kind of roll our eyes and get ready to walk away.
Yeah.
Right? Like every
okay.
woman knows when you hear something slightly maybe pervy come out of a guy's mouth that you're just ready
Shields
to run. But he had a legit business card, and I guess he just he came up with the idea for the Mothman statue, and he arranged it and like knew the designer or something. So he calls himself Mothman's Daddy, and I guess just sits down the street from the statue and like waits to give out his card. So
that's such a cool, beautiful riverside small town, with a lot of cool shops and museums and points of interest and bridges and the river and docks and all that cool stuff. So like it's just
beautiful.
a really neat place. Yeah.
We're going to do a whole Mothman episode, and maybe we'll email Mothman's daddy
Yeah.
and see if he wants to come, because I think he told us he was like an investigator during when it was all happening. He was like, "Oh yeah, I was running around the woods." So who knows what that means, but I'm excited to hear about it. So come back next week for more Rehmeyers Hollow, and check out our Facebook page. We have a fan group, Everything Under the Moon, and an Instagram and a Patreon. It's all EUTM, Everything Under the Moon podcast.
Oh, and please send us ideas stories, anything. Tell us how your day's going. You can email us at tellmelandstel@gmail.com. That's 2 L's in Stel, 1 L in Mel. tellmelandstel@gmail.com.
Well, thanks for everyone for listening. We'll see you next time on Everything Under the Moon
With Mel and Stel.